And we're live in 10. And we're live now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of the Miracle of Coordination. It's called The Challenge of Changing Habits. Now, the word habit has come to connote something that we want to get rid of, something that causes us trouble. We rarely seem to be as concerned about good habits because they work well for us and they help us along our path and contribute positively to our well-being, our happiness, and our success. The subject of today's talk is what we call habits that stand in our way, the ones that cause us trouble. And they are the subject of today's talk in theory. In practice, I will show you a few things, but it's more difficult because really I should be there with you, showing you with my hands. The Alexander work is hands-on work. So in Zen Buddhism, there's a saying, the obstacle is the path. So let's go deeper into where habits live, where and how their pathways are created in the brain and in the central nervous system. Here are some basic facts about how the brain learns. Every human movement, thought, or feeling is a precisely timed electrical signal traveling through a chain of neurons, a circuit of nerve fibers. Now, if you have heard the word synapse, that is a particular term that refers to the junction or the site of transmission of electric nerve impulses between two nerve cells. And when I was growing up, we used to say as a compliment, he's got fast synapses, because the communication between the nerve cells was very quick. So you had good speed, good coordination. However, in recent years, there has been a lot of talk, a lot of buzz about a topic called myelin. Now, myelin is the insulation that wraps these nerve fibers and increases signal strength, speed, and accuracy. And the more we fire a particular circuit, the more the myelin wraps itself around that circuit, and the stronger and faster and clearer and more fluent our movements become. So the Talent Code is a wonderful book. I recommend it. And it goes into great detail about myelination and about skill. And it does so with some really entertaining examples about sport, the arts, music in particular, and just general knowledge of how this process plays out in life. So the man that did a lot of research on this is called George Bartzokis. He was, I'm not sure he still is, I think he may have retired, but he was professor of neurology at UCLA. Now he says all skills, all language, all music, all movements are made of living circuits. and all circuits operate according to certain rules. So when we fire these circuits in the right way, the myelination takes place. It responds by wrapping the layers of this substance. It's called a phospholipid. It's a fatty substance around that neural circuit, each layer incorporating a bit more skill and speed. The thicker the myelin gets, the better it insulates and the faster and more accurate our movements are. Its growth enables all manner of skills, mental and physical. Now, we know what happens when myelin is damaged, and that is what Jacqueline Dupre suffered. She had damage to the myelin sheaths around the nerve fibers, and therefore the communications between the neurons are impaired. So the more time and energy you put into the right kind of practice, the more you myelinate those circuits, and the better your skill and the more dependable your skill is. So this is what it looks like. This is a myelin sheath, that's sausage-like links, sausage-like links. And the signals that pass through actually fire the wrapping process. It's of course much more complex than what I'm describing, but this is a very simple analysis of it. But it's fascinating. I did not know. I've taught and worked for years with creative repetition. So repetition that gets from this angle and that angle and so on. I did not know that myelination was taking place, but I knew that something resulted in a better learning process. So this is what a cross-section of myelination looks like. And you can have as many as 50 layers deep when you have a really strongly developed skill. So the whole neurological mechanism is designed by nature to keep us on the move and moving out of the way of danger. So we learn these skills for survival. And because we are tool users, it's also a sophisticated mechanism allowing us to build complex skills. All well and good, but if we begin to go more deeply into why a well-established habit is difficult to change, why it is so tenacious, we must have respect for these deep processes of the brain. I'm going to go back to that other slide. I want you to just take a look at that and remember it, because those are the deep processes where your habits live, in that myelination. Unlike animals, Alexander observed, our learning process is fallible. What he called our subconscious direction, the process of acquiring habits below the conscious level, can put us wrong. What we learn depends mostly, not entirely, on what we are shown. And it also depends on how strong our natural good use is. In other words, the coordination we're born with, our innate coordination. I would like to bring in another author, David Garlick, who's written a book called The Lost Sixth Sense. Now, this author was a great help to me when I was training in the technique, because of course musicians are trained to rely on their muscle memory, and that muscle memory gets practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced until we have a measure of the instrument, a measure of pressure in the bow, a measure of a shift. It's thousands of skills that depend on that muscle memory. So the sixth sense that David Garlick refers to is called kinesthesia. And it's a sense of you in movement, the sense of your limbs, your body position. For example, when you're standing, you know your head's here, your feet are there, your arms are by your side or they're out from your side. That's all that sense of yourself moving in space and also resting in space. What he says is that there's evidence that this sixth sense has been lost or suppressed in our modern civilization. Because our minds, we spend a lot of time up here being occupied with the speed of the world that we live in and all the tasks that we have to do. And so this sense, this reliable sense of our body and of our self in space becomes remote. He calls it gated out before reaching consciousness. Alexander called it faulty sensory appreciation, meaning that the feedback from our sensory system is not reliable. In other words, what you may be thinking you're doing is not what, in fact, you are doing. And this is a great, great shock when it comes, when you're shown it in Alexander work, because we think that we have a mastery of our sense of what we're doing. And we're not prepared at all when we realize that there's a great gap between what we're doing and what we're actually feeling. So Alexander's work is based on a re-education of our sensory awareness. So I'm going to go into his story very briefly. I won't spend too long. Alexander's discoveries began with getting to know his habits. And it was his habits of vocal use. He was a Shakespearean reciter, and he lost his voice on stage. So he used mirrors, and he used, later on, he made a structure with 3 mirrors so that he could observe himself from the side, the front, and the back. And he was very patient. So these observations took place day by day, month by month, and year by year. And by comparing his speaking voice to his stage voice over and over again, he made many discoveries. The 3 most important ones, if you've watched this series, you might remember, are stiffening the neck, pulling the head back and down, and contracting the spine before doing something. And of course, all this adds up to making far too much tension. Now, Alexander was willing to test out these discoveries and to explore his failures. He didn't try to just decide he was going to get this right, but he wanted to go deeply into how he was going wrong. And I think that's not only admirable, but it's essential to understand where our habits have placed us, because we can't change anything that we don't fully understand. Now, he came to the interesting conclusion that habits are deeply connected to intention. The intention to do something is the trigger for the habit. And that stopping, what he called inhibition, is the foundation for altering habits. I'll take you very simply through the process of change that Alexander went through, because it becomes a model for anyone who wants to look into this more deeply and to follow this path of understanding one's habits. The first thing was self-observation. So he found these 3 habits, and later on he learned more about that pattern of misuse. So in addition to stiffening his neck, pulling his head back and down, gasping for air, shortening his spine, He also was tightening and throwing forward his back and stiffening his legs, pulling his feet up off the floor. I sometimes ask my students to come back with observations about what's happening in their feet, because the other end of them interests me as much as the top end. And very often, when they get to something difficult, the feet come off the floor. So at the very moment when they need to establish their grounding, they do the opposite. Now, Alexander tried to make a direct change. So he tried to alter these habits directly when using his stage voice. But he was not successful because his old habits were stronger and much faster to activate than the new patterns that he wished to employ. So he failed over and over again. So he came to this second juncture in the road. The first juncture was observing his habits and finding out just how extensive they were. The second junction was the discovery of inhibition. So he realized he was not going to be successful in making a direct change. So he put aside all thought of doing, and he entered that state of empty mind where he had no intention. Now that's a powerful place, because in that place, you're not triggering your habit. And he worked for many months from that place. And that's where you work when you have an Alexander lesson. You work by giving up the intention of doing something, and you allow something new to take place. What is that new thing? You're allowing a freedom in the neck. You're allowing the back to stay back and up. And you're allowing the knees to go forward and away. And in that state is the best possible coordination that you can experience, because you're free. There's nothing in the way. Now, he brought back all of that experience of primary control, just neck free, head forward and up, back lengthening and widening, into his stage reciting after a very long time. And he still failed. And this is where he made the discovery of faulty sensory awareness, being guided by his feeling of what was right, his muscle memory. In other words, his old habitual feeling. So he had to go back to the drawing board and see how could he prevent that old feeling from taking over. And what he realized was that he'd have to give up relying on that. And he'd have to be guided by his reason, and by making the directions for the primary control primary. So he practiced the directions for good use for long enough until he was able to stop the old habit from taking over, and he could engage in the new freely and easily, without strain and without tightening, and without relying on his old muscle memory. And gradually, through repetition, new pathways were activated. New pathways were created for a better and more productive way of speaking and reciting. So we call that making the primary control primary, putting the directions first. And therefore, the directions, the process, are more important than the end result. Now, what does psychophysical mean? I have used this term before. Alexander teachers often will use this term in their early work with a pupil to emphasize that all actions are an indivisible whole. Everything that you do involves mental and physical, and they are one. They're not this and that. You don't have a mind that goes along with the body. Alexander's discoveries led the way into today's thinking of the mind as being embodied. Every bit of your mind is connected to and manifests in the body. There is no difference between mental and physical. We are one. Now, in later years, Alexander called his work a study of human reaction, because through the long discipline of this work, you begin to see that you cannot separate from your reactions, and that it takes time, and it takes understanding, and it takes practice not to react unthinkingly, but to be able to respond. So the degree to which conscious thought process is present and not just unconscious reaction is a sign of an evolved human being and an evolved musician, in my experience. My Alexander teacher asked me early on in my lessons, "What is your aim for coming here?" And I said, I quoted Socrates, "Know thyself." I want to know what I'm doing, not just produce it automatically. Okay, I'm going to now talk about the more practical aspects of changing habits. So, self-observation. That's not easy. What do you look at? How do you look? And how do you go about this? Well, it's a process, and that's the beauty of it. It's a journey. There's no formula, there's no recipe. Each person comes to the work with their own patterns of behavior and habit. And you start from where you are. As I said, in Zen, the saying is, the obstacle is the path. So if you have a habit that's particularly distressing to you and you want to know more about it, write it down and start from that habit. There's usually a reason why that habit is more pressing to you or more concerning to you than another one. So essentially, self-observation is looking with detachment, stepping a bit back from yourself. And that was the function of the mirror for Alexander. It created a space between himself and the object he was studying. Now, these days we have wonderful tools. There's an app called Coach's Eye, EYE. It's marvelous. You can take films of yourself. You can place it at different angles. You can keep a record of one film from day to day. You can study those films. You can draw on them. You can magnify them. And it offers a good path towards observation. The other is keeping a journal or a diary, keeping notes. I did that for many years. And of course, if you have lessons, your teacher is your observer. Your teacher points out what is going on, the things that you can't see, and helps you to stop so that something else can take place. Now, I think it's very important to spend quiet time without the instrument, first of all. So you can spend time in what we call lying down work, which is you lie down on the floor with something under your head to support you, your knees up, and you take the information that that firm surface gives you So that's supporting you and your back is resting on it. Now that already starts to give you information about where you are. You can spend about 15-20 minutes like that every day. It rests the spine, it allows the mind to stop. And of course, if you have an Alexander lesson, you will get what's called table work. And table work is work done in the horizontal by your teacher, freeing up your neck, freeing the back, legs. They do the whole tour of the body. And it's one of the loveliest ways you can ever spend time, is to have a table turn. So you spend that quiet time without the instrument, and that's where the observation starts. And then as you bring in the instrument, your teacher can help you with that, your Alexander teacher can help you with that, or you can watch in the mirror, see what happens to the balance of your head, what happens to your shoulders, what happens to your feet. All manner of things go on when the instrument comes in towards you. And I also ask my students to put the instrument away from them and to look at it. Because as a first step, that's a fascinating study. Already, there's an activation of your habit just looking at the instrument because you imagine that you're playing it. Or you might be imagining starting to play it or performing with it. And so there are quite a number of reactions that take place without ever touching it. That was a revelation to me when I started this work. Then you can, once you bring the instrument in towards you and you sit with it, you can spend time not playing, just bringing the mind into quiet. And that can be quite a challenge for a long time. And then when you finally begin to use the arms, left arm, right arm, when I was working, I broke down the acts of bringing the bow to the string into tiny bits. And I'd work on maybe just placing my hand on the bow for a while and not doing anything, but just placing it there without wanting to grab it and pick it up and tighten my shoulder. And then bringing it to the string and then leaving it on the string for a while, being quiet. And then seeing, where does the energy come from to pull the bow? Does it come from the shoulder? Does it come from the neck? There's any manner of ways in which we misuse ourselves when we play. And then you can do this playfully. You can turn the bow around, you can turn it upside down and place it on the string. You can take a stick, place it on the string. A stick is more neutral than a bow. And from that you can begin to learn, oh, I'm tightening my thumb a lot on the bow, aren't I? So there are endless opportunities in the sequence of events leading up to actually playing, in which you can spend time seeing what happens to all of me as I do this small thing. So you're enlarging the scope of your awareness. Your awareness is not just your hand, the bow, and the string. It's much larger than that. Keep it easy, keep it open, experiment, explore. Being fierce with your efforts will not help you. And trying very hard to get it right will not also help you. This is learning to stop and learning to come into yourself and be present and not be pulled out there. So I have 3 little sayings that I use with my students. I ask them to notice their environment when they're working. If their eyes fix, that means something is tightening in here in the neck, because the eyes are intimately connected to the primary control. So keeping the eyes and the attention easy. Being present to the breath, leaving the breath alone, letting it come and go. Don't force the breath. and remembering to include your whole body from head to toe in your awareness, and then eventually expanding that into the space around you. Once you begin this journey, you will see that habits represent the past playing out in the present. Some habits are not harmful and some are only relatively harmful, but in my experience, too many are, and they cause problems at the unconscious level, and they cause pain. At the cello, our teacher's habits, both good and bad, can become our own, especially if one is an osmotic learner. That means if you soak up things, if you don't need words to explain, you just intuitively pick up how to do something. So you learn by absorbing and imitating, as children tend to do. There is no screen or filter in a child that says, this is healthy movement, and that is not. I call the force of habit the strongest unrecognized force in the universe. Most of the disorder that we see around us is a product of habits that we cannot change. We don't know the way to change, and we don't have the means whereby to do so. And so we go on repeating and repeating and reliving the past in the present and stifling our growth and development. The Alexander technique provides a framework for examining our habits, a way to take a measure of our thinking processes. It's most definitely a framework for self-observation, which is how Alexander made his step-by-step discoveries, all alone, without the help of anyone except his keen eye, his intelligence, and a mirror. So he has provided us with a path for changing habits. It's a simple path, but it's not easy. As he said, the difficulty lies in the breaking of the habit, not the thing itself. And finally, the study of the Alexander technique brings us to the threshold of a realm which is not possible to put into the words of the ordinary mind. So after years of study, if one has the patience, one finds one's thinking slowing down, but the movement freeing up. So there's the power beyond the ordinary mind, in which the action is one. The movement does itself. And that's an extraordinary state of mind to glimpse. I've only had glimpses of it, but that's what I'm working towards. I would like to close with a passage from one of my favorite writers, Joseph Campbell, from an essay called The Inspiration of Oriental Art. He says, in order to experience what is before him, the artist has mainly to look, and looking finally is an unaggressive activity. One does not say to one's eyes, go out and do something to that thing out there. One looks long, and the world comes in. There is an important Chinese term, wu wei, not doing, the meaning of which is not doing nothing, but not forcing. Things will open up of themselves according to their nature. The secret is to begin to take that first step into the land of habit. And these are the choices, some of the choices that await you. You start out like that little critter on the left. If you're not careful, that you end up like the lady in the middle, which leads to the future on the right. Or maybe this will be your path. Being embodied as a child, being embodied as an adult, and being embodied in the third age, as Alexander was. Thank you. So we have time for some questions.
Sure thing. While we wait for some questions to come in, is there anything else you'd like to elaborate on in your lecture?
Well, I would say that this is a journey that's very challenging, and one that has many pitfalls, but also many highs. And you have to become what's called detached from it. You travel through it, but you don't let it possess you. And that's the challenge of it for me. And that's the difficulty. How do I pick up the chat? Oh, here. Hello, Guy. Nice to hear from you. Thank you for taking part.
Let's see. Yeah, we're still waiting on some questions. I think it's going to take some time for people to process. But
Yeah.
I was wondering, you know, in this part of self-observation, with could you just clarify what you know what was the how things occurred before Edmund Jacobson's work with mental imagery, and how it's impacted, you know, your viewpoints after?
Sure. Alexander didn't believe in imagery. He didn't use it for the most part. And the reason he didn't use it is because he felt that the faulty sensory appreciation would translate that image wrongly. So rather than use images, he used his eyes to observe what happens when I think this or I think that. Does my neck tighten? Does my head pull back and down? Does my spine shorten? Or can I leave all of this alone to function naturally as I'm thinking of doing something? Because it's the problems occur at thought level. They don't occur in the action. They occur at thought level. And the thought activates the muscles to perform the action in a certain way. So what you think is what you get. Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne. Do you have any suggestions for encouraging conscious embodiment in our daily lives? Well, yes, go take Alexander lessons. They're wonderful. I hope you meditate. There are many other paths. You can do Feldenkrais, you can do yoga. The unique aspect of Alexander is that he's not concerned with teaching you to do the right thing. He's concerned with stopping the wrong thing from happening. And that is a fundamental difference between his work and every other work that I've encountered, is that he wants to get the wrong thing out of the way so that the right thing will do itself. And that's absolutely revolutionary way of looking at education. It still is today, nearly 100 years after he died. Thank you, Maria. Good. I'm glad you're interested in studying the work. It's worth looking into, definitely. These days, especially in the lives that we lead, they're so fast, they're so pushed. You need something that counterbalances that. From Guy, I recently had some students play with a book on their heads. I noticed an immediate improvement with posture and concentration. Well, I would reckon that their thoughts went up rather than down. And so that's definitely going to produce some kind of awareness of your head. But I would just caution you, because it's very possible to have a book on your head and still tighten your neck. That's a danger that we face all the time in our cello playing, is that neck stiffening and effectively shutting down the flow of energy through the body. We're really looking at that flow of energy. That's what we're working with all the time. How is the energy traveling through the body as we're playing? Is it blocked somewhere? Have I blocked my shoulder? Have I blocked my lower back? So it's not so much about posture. It's more about that active exchange of energy.
I think there's another question with regards to if one is, if one is under a system of pressure and in a competition or in a performance or in an audition, and one tightens and old habits reoccur because that's something that they feel more comfortable about. How does one move past that stage of development and into, sort of an improved state where even under pressure these habits are
They
are
don't come
mitigated?
back at you. Well,
Exactly.
this work is perfect for that, because that's exactly what Alexander noticed, is that under pressure, his habits worsened. He did more tightening and more throwing of his head back and more throwing of his back forward when he performed than when he spoke normally. So the fact is that habits, once they're learned, they're relegated to very deep structures of the brain. It's called the cerebellum. And they're relegated to those structures because we want them to operate instantaneously. So we want to be able to do something without having to go through all the processes that we learned it with. We want the finished result. So to take apart that habit, that approach, is very time consuming. It takes time, but once you get to the root, you never experience the habit again. You have to go to the root of the habit, not deal with it at the surface manifestation level, but at the root level. And the root level means that you have to stop for a time. Say if you're having trouble in your performances, maybe you have to stop playing for a time. And you have to go back to the beginning and study that reactivity through your lessons in the technique. Your teacher will take a very simple activity, sitting down, and they'll ask you, don't think about the chair. I'm going to take you into the chair. Do not think about sitting down. Well, you can't stop thinking about sitting down. It's impossible. You recognize you cannot stop that. And it takes a very long time of lessons before you can empty your mind of the thought of sitting down and just let the knees go away and you sit. It's very simple. But you don't think about the chair. So it's a process, as I said. If you're having trouble in performance, go back, as Alexander did. Start with simple things, observing yourself. What happens when I pick up the bow? What happens when I initiate the sound? Do I press? Do I tighten my neck to initiate the sound? Or can I leave all of this alone and initiate the sound? Okay. From Guy. Yes, something light is best and only to bring awareness for a short time. You take it away, you're more mindful of support. Absolutely. Good. Guy, keep exploring. This is what this work is about. Just keep exploring the thinking processes behind playing. That for me is the fascination of this work. From Joan Raymond. Why is it that we seem to be inclined to do the wrong thing in most physical endeavors? If our bodies do this naturally, why is that? Well, we've been conditioned improperly. Alexander said that animals don't have the opportunity to go wrong. They learn through instinct, and the instinct is programmed into them. It's born into them. If you watch the way a duck learns, a duckling learns to swim, just follows the mother and boom, it's activated and off they go. But human beings have a far more complex central nervous system, and it's fallible. It can go wrong, and we must recognize that, and we must also be respectful of our going wrong, because it's an opportunity to become conscious. Otherwise, we might never do that. So there is a natural good use. It's there underneath, but it's been covered over by what we've learned and absorbed from everybody around us from a young age. I now see children from the age of 6 who have terribly disturbed coordination at age 6. It used to be 25 years ago, age 8 and 9, and now it's age 5 and 6. Think about that. It's very frightening.
Do you feel as teachers, it's your approach in correcting habits for young children is different than correcting adult amateurs, for example?
Yes, young kids are much smarter. The younger they are, the smarter they are. And the older they are, the more difficult it is to convince them or even to work with them, because change is difficult. The longer that myelination wraps, the harder it is to change. So by all means, if you're in music college and you're 18, 19, start this work, look at your habits, because you won't have to do it when you're 40 years old and having back pain. You can do it now when you're still relatively close to your natural coordination, I would say.
So in that case, how would you say if you're teaching an adult amateur, how would you adjust your teaching to really allow them to move on from and develop new, better formed habits?
Well, if you're a teacher, you're modeling something, you're communicating something about the flow of energy. So I would say cultivate your garden, work on yourself, work on yourself. And then when you play something for an adult amateur, they're picking up that flow of energy in your body. They're picking a lot of things up. You know that most of learning is nonverbal. So if you're modeling a good free use and you're quiet in yourself and you're listening and they come into that presence, things start to change for them. They pay attention differently. So the very best thing you can do for your students and for yourself is to look after yourself. Watch your habits, learn about them, learn what they can teach you, and you'll pass that on non-verbally to the people that you play with, people that you work with, the people that you live with. Because life is constant playing out of habit. Habit is unfortunately the present taken over by the past. So if you want to begin to live in the present and not in the chains of the past, you have to look at your habits. Ultimately, it's psychological and philosophical, this work, at the highest level. It's about consciousness. Jonathan Allen. Hello, Jonathan. How does one teach if the student is not an osmotic learner? Well, that's a very good question. You can reason with them. You can teach them to, you can verbalize all of this. You can show them. You can put them in front of a mirror and show them what they are doing. Remember, you as a teacher, you are in the role of a mirror. You are mirroring for your student what they're doing and what could change. So it's a complex role that you play as a teacher. And ultimately, your being is what teaches, what communicates from where you are. Not you. What you do comes from who you are and where you are. So the work that you do on yourself is multiplied and touches all facets of your life. So our Alexander work always brings us back to the place of self-responsibility. What are you going to be responsible for? What will you take responsibility for? And the word responsibility has inherent in it the term to respond. So you are being asked to be able to respond. And most of us can only react. We have no power over our responses. Our reactions are very quick and unthinking. And they've been deliberately cultivated like that since we went to school. That's our modern educational system. So you can't do anything more revolutionary than this work because it goes against your conditioning from the time you're young. From Russell. Hello, Russell. How does one encourage their own primary control, the primary center for direction? Well, Alexander's work teaches you to be able to see and understand your interference to the primary control. When you recognize how you're interfering, oh, I'm tightening my neck to do that. Oh, I'm pulling my head back to lift the bow. I didn't know that I was doing that. So gradually, the work involves letting go of the interferences. And then the primary control works very well. It's built to work. There's no mystery about it. But we constantly interfere with it. From Joan. As an older player, I have had injuries and surgeries. These in my age definitely impact my physicality and flexibility. Many like me play in pain. Lost cause? Well, you have my deepest sympathies. To love the cello and to suffer in pain it seems to me to be two polar opposites. How can something you love cause you pain? So I would say step back and start to look at what you're doing. It's never too late to do that. When I was training in London, there was a pianist from Arkansas who was in his late 70s, and he qualified when he was over 80. He's an Alexander teacher somewhere in Arkansas. I don't know, I've lost track of him. But if he could do it, anybody could do it. So you start from where you are. Start from where you are. Start to look. And in looking, you begin to see. You're not a lost cause. for sure. It's the end of the questions, and William asked me to make some closing remarks. I want to thank all of you that have followed this 4-part series. It's been very challenging for me to put into words something that I normally do with my hands. I had to verbalize work that is very much nonverbal as well as verbal. And I don't have that opportunity to demonstrate. I don't have the opportunity to put hands on anybody, to illustrate, to give you the sensory experience of what this work is about. Sort of like I've extolled the virtues of wine, but we never had the wine tasting. And so that's a source of regret for me. But I hope you'll look into the work further, go and have some lessons, and take your time. Think about where you are, where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years. And think about that power that resides in you. It's already there underneath those layers of habit, and it's worth digging in for it. Thank you.